There's just a huge amount of things that these guidelines help to guide in order to make sure that there's some sort of checked boxes that schools are feeding their students. They're getting varied nutrients from the different food groups, the correct amounts that are needed to grow. Now, this is all, do all kids eat all the things in their tray? Absolutely not. But at least there's some sort of guidelines. So that's what the dietary guidelines do, for compliance purposes for those nutrition assistance programs that reach so many people, so many Americans every year.
Welcome to Salad with a Side of Fries. I'm your host, Jenn Trepeck, talking wellness and weight loss for real life. We're here to clear up the myths, misinformation, bad science, and marketing to teach you how to eat and how to cheat. Are you ready? I'm having salad with a side of fries. Hey friend, welcome back to Salad with a Side of Fries. I'm Jenn Trepeck, your health coach and host, here with you every week for Wellness Without the Weirdness. Joining me today is, I think, one of my favorite humans. She's a fitness instructor, a dietitian, an incredible human. Julie is here with us. Welcome back.
Yeah, it's been a minute. I did like a Thanksgiving segment, I think, a couple years ago.
Yeah, we did an episode called Your New BFF that was all about flexibility.
That's amazing. I love it.
It was in 2020, no less.
Oh, yeah.
So everybody wants to go back. It was episode 57 that aired November 11th of 2020.
Wow, a different time.
Indeed it was. And new time, new nutrition guidelines, because
correct.
That's what happened. So today we're talking about the FDA's new food pyramid. And frankly, now what? Right? Like, I think of it like new year, new dietary confusion.
Correct. Yeah. So a couple weeks ago, I think I'll preface it. I work at a food bank now. I work in community nutrition at the moment. And there's yet to be seen all of the ways that the new guidelines will be impacting.
Oh, yeah.
It's just been a couple weeks. So it's really like hot off the press. That being said, there's already been a lot of back and forth and pointing fingers and this is good, this is bad, the ugly, the all the things. From a community standpoint, we will, later talk about the federal nutrition programs that are directly usually impacted by dietary guidelines. So that's like very specific. But again, it's still very new. So nothing has changed as of yet.
But it was exactly all of those visceral response conversations that sparked this episode, because you and I started messaging on Instagram all about it.
I mean, I was like, I think I need to message Jenn. I'm also doing dry January. So it's hilarious that I am just like, oh, okay, not going to go forget about it and have my glass of wine, right? I need to text a friend. I need to text a friend.
Use my tools, right?
Yeah, use my tools because the wine isn't there tonight now.
Yeah. So anyway, we were texting and I was like, Jules, let's do this episode together. And I also appreciate, because of where you're working full time right now, like your perspective on this is different than mine because of the population that you're working with. And also, you are a dietitian. I am not. Full disclosure to everybody. You guys, if you're a longtime listener, you know that. So again, like we come to this from sort of different sides, and yet we are so aligned in a lot of things.
That's what the dietary guidelines are meant to do. It's meant to bring the science and then the communication together in an effective and evidence-based way. So you as a communicator and, reaching different audiences in different ways that really can help people, but then also understanding that it should be coming from a place of science. And so that's a lot of it too. And I will say too, my previous work, and I still do some projects with them. It was a nutrition affairs organization called Nutrition on Demand, and they monitor policy, like the dietary guidelines. So I was actually very much a part of observing the previous process, like the 5-year process of the dietary guideline committee that now has been not really accepted, like been rejected, which we can talk about how much,
Yeah, exactly.
Over half of it has been rejected, but we'll get down that line. But like, I did observe all of those public meetings and try to furiously take notes and understand all of the nuances of the science that they dig into over the course of years.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's interesting. These new guidelines are published a little late, are supposed to represent a consensus of understanding which I don't think they necessarily do. But anyway, all right, because we cannot help ourselves. Let's do this. We're going to tell our hub members what they're getting this week. And then we're going to start to tackle this. And admittedly, I had this grand plan where we were going to objectively just share the food pyramid for anybody who hasn't seen it and objectively explain what they're saying and then come back with our thoughts. And that is not how this is going to play out, which is fine. So we're going to do it first before I forget. Okay. Happy Healthy Hub. Friends, your recipe this week is for spaghetti squash carbonara. Okay. Yes, it's gluten-free, low carb, all the things. Most of all, it is deliciousness. So add more veggies, add more protein, eat it on its own. It's beyond delicious. So spaghetti squash carbonara. And it's your last chance for 10% off my next group coaching cohort. So jump in on that too. It starts with a complimentary chat so that we can see if it's a fit for you. So if you want this recipe or 10% off my next group coaching cohort, be sure you're a member of the Happy Healthy Hub. You'll go to asaladwithasideofries.com/membership for just $12 a month. Or by the way, you can pay the whole year at once and get 2 months free. You get a weekly recipe, curated articles, discounts from me and our partners, expert interview episodes in full video, including behind-the-scenes content, a community board with the ability to post and comment, and access to the 24/7 Ask Me Anything so that we can target your specific questions or challenges. All of this for just $120 a year if you pay all year, or $12 a month. So it's really the next best thing to working with me as your health coach. If you're ready to level up this year, support this podcast and yourself, go to asaladwithasideofries.com/membership. Or click the link in the episode notes below. From there, you're going to click subscribe now, follow the prompts to enter your payment info, create your login to access the hub, and you'll be all set to receive this week's recipe for spaghetti squash carbonara and details to claim your 10% off my next group coaching cohort. Okay, so Jules, I was thinking about the Simon Sinek approach of like why, how, what. And it just made me think like maybe before we even get into all the details of what they shared, let's talk about why this is important. Because I think a lot of people also sit here and go, does it even really matter? I, for a long time, have not been following whatever the current government guidelines were, because for a long time, we have understood them to be a bit antiquated and, taken with a grain of salt to some degree. But as you started to talk about before, the programs that these guidelines direct are the military, food assistance, school meals, that kind of stuff. And so I know you pulled together some data for us.
Yeah. What's tricky is that actually, I'm going to call you right back out, Jen. You probably are. I know a lot of the amazing things that you share and teach, and that is dietary guidelines. It's like making half your plate fruit and veggies, right? Like you're always working in and teaching ways to incorporate more veggies into a dish that might not normally have as many as you to get more servings in, right? So that alone, I think that a lot of us don't know we're necessarily following them when we are, That being said, unfortunately, about 60% of the US population has not been following the dietary guidelines as they are intended to be utilized. So not only is that problematic and I'll get back to the programs, I promise. Not only is that problematic when it comes to that's a bummer, how can we fix that? How can we communicate them better? But this new guideline and, the administration putting it out, HHS, when you say like, we're changing all the guidelines and they're problematic. We haven't been they're terrible. We got to get rid of them. This is the new, this is the better, this is the improved.
Right.
It's actually like almost half basically of the population weren't even following based on reporting, like self-reporting, which is how nutrition really is mainly measured by surveying and self-reporting, which is really tricky. Probably can go down that rabbit hole later. So anyway, so it's tricky. It's like, it's hard to blame something that you might not even know you're following.
Yes, 1,000%. And I also think, and again, we'll probably talk about this more in a minute too, but there's a difference between public health and individual health.
Yes.
And the way we communicate about those things and the choices that are made when we're talking about individual health versus public health. And That also, I think, is a distinction that isn't more widely discussed. And I think we assume that a lot of the things that are spoken about in terms of public health are intended to be about individual health.
Well, and I feel like I've said this. So I teach, I go to food pantries and I teach actual, individuals and families. And then I teach culinary students in a job training program, like different people, right? I have used the phrase nutrition is nuanced a lot more recently because I feel like always want to find a solution that works for me and works for you and works for your grandma and works for your kid. Like, it's just not how nutrition works. I really wish that there was a pretty little package that we could, although you and I would probably be out of a job then. But if there was.
You know what? If that was the case where everybody knew what to eat and there were no health problems in the world because of what people are eating, I would gladly find something else to do.
Well, yeah. And also just that it's not even like what you should and shouldn't eat. It's just that things are different for everybody. Like your access to food is different. We live in different states that grow different crops at different times of year. Like you can go back to the basics and there's a reason why some people can eat certain things and some people can't. Like there's environmental factors that now are increasing and contributing to like allergy rates. Like there's so much. And so it's really hard because you start with that and you're like, dang, I wish I could, have an easy solution for somebody. And that's just not the case. So the guidelines, why they exist is for federal programs, nutrition programs like SNAP, which in 2024, 6,704,000 people were on WIC. SNAP, 41.7 million last year were receiving SNAP benefits. And then the National School Lunch Program, the National School Breakfast Program, there's also a snack program. It serves nearly 30 million students in about 94,000 schools nationwide. So, there's just a huge amount of things that these guidelines help to guide in order to make sure that there's some sort of checked boxes that schools are feeding their students. They're getting varied nutrients from the different food groups, the correct amounts that are needed to grow. No, this is all, do all kids eat all the things in their tray? Absolutely not. But at least there's some sort of guidelines. So that's what the dietary guidelines do, for compliance purposes for those nutrition assistance programs that reach so many people, so many Americans every year. But then there's also just the baseline guidelines so that people, educators like you and like me, can say, these are the recommendations based on,
a consensus of the research.
A consensus of the research, like, okay, we need this about this amount of magnesium for healthy person or healthy growth. We need this much calcium. We need like all those daily recommendations. And then looking at kind of a basic outline of a dietary pattern that I like to say pattern because diet is not just like one day, one meal, one recipe. It is over the course of lifespans and the life cycle and different life stages. So it's a framework.
Right.
That's then intended to be interpreted and shared and utilized to support healthy eating across the board.
Yeah. So just for everybody, WIC is women, infants, and children. And that's sort of supplemental support. SNAP is what we often think of as like the food stamp program.
Yeah.
And then I think school lunches and military meals and that kind of stuff, everybody understands. But so that is, I think, the primary use of these guidelines. And frankly, the agencies that are supposed to or where following these guidelines is enforced, I feel like. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. There are guidelines that if like say, for instance, the school lunch, if a school wants to be reimbursed for meals from the federal government, they have to comply with the guidelines in order to, and check the boxes. Like they have to get their menus basically approved. Like we served, 2 ounces of protein, at this meal, we served this many ounces of whole grain in each meal. Like they report on that so that then they are supplemented by, and reimbursed for those meals, which is huge. And I will say school lunch, we could do a whole other podcast on that program alone and like the goods and the bads of that program. But I will say for so many people, the national school lunch and breakfast programs for a lot of children that don't have easy access to food or food insecure people, that is like maybe their one well-rounded balanced meal of the day.
Right.
So it is important. These programs do matter. And a lot of the schools that participate in them aren't even necessarily only serving under, low income households. Like a lot of schools participate because serving lunch is really expensive for staffing, for the food, the cost of food, the bids that
and
big
that's
industries
where
have.
exactly. So I want to get into it because I think the cost piece is where we're going to see the challenge in meeting some of these guidelines, even the ones we are excited about.
Yeah.
So, okay, so we're going to post this. Many of you, I think, by this time have seen these new guidelines, but we will post at Salad with a Side of Fries pod on Instagram. We'll link in the episode notes to the official publication that shows the image. But for this moment, it essentially has this upside down pyramid where the top left shows a lot of meat and dairy. The top right shows vegetables and fruit. And those two on the left and right, then sort of in the center toward the top also, you have a bunch of fats. So there's some oil, there's an avocado, I think that's supposed to be butter. And then there's some nuts in there. And then the bottom, call it 20%, like this tip of the upside down.
I call it the
triangle.
tornado.
Right. Yeah, it does. It looks like a tornado. The tip is your whole grains, except they're showing you bread, which I have my own beef with because by definition, once it's bread, it's not whole. But that's beside the point. So that's essentially what they're saying. But I do think, and here's another piece of how this is communicated and publicized, is the image is the primary communicator, and this image is not particularly clear. Now, they did include a lot of words that go with it. I just think most people aren't looking at the rest of those words.
The number of reposts that we live in a world of content, as I said, and this can be beneficial because we all can get access to content faster than before, right? Social media, internet, everything is blasted immediately. But it's also super problematic because, just circulating a picture of that, nobody had time to read the 400-page appendices and the 90-page scientific foundation booklet that they also produced with the 10-page consumer thing. People saw the pyramid, liked that there was meat at the top maybe, and reposted it. It's like
exactly.
a logo. It reminds me more of a logo than a communicative guide.
Right.
But you're right. That's exactly. People are going to remember and work with that over all the content behind it.
Right. And, in their language around it, and I want to break down each category a little bit too as we talk through it. But, in their language around it too, there's so much contradiction that, we'll get there. But I don't know that they have really done us all the service that they think they have, because in the language and how they described it as this liberation of food and all of these phrases, but yet I feel like this also completely ignores the progress that has been made in these guidelines since 2011. It's they ignored what's happened in the last couple administrations. We haven't used the pyramid in a long time.
Yeah. And I think it is, a testament to how short our attention spans are as humans now, which I am.
We're all in that camp.
As much a fault of. And COVID really did a number on us, but that can be really problematic because then you can immediately accept things as truths without necessarily knowing the full background or knowing the why behind something. We jump to conclusions. We're so reactive in our decision making instead of being more thorough because we're used to just getting things so quickly, like an answer, a solution, the truth. And it's is this, no, that's not really. First of all, science definitely shouldn't work that way. A lot of things shouldn't work that way, but especially science and especially nutrition science. Nutrition science is more difficult. I also teach this in the classes that I've taught, it's more difficult to look at research for nutrition because a longer period of time, it is different than just taking a pill and taking a placebo pill. And then in a month, maybe your blood pressure is lower. That's a very concrete structure of an experiment. Right. Nutrition is so long-term,
And so individual. There are so many confounding factors. It is very difficult to isolate. And to your point before, also, the primary data source is self-reporting, which is notoriously unreliable. So
Yeah.
I appreciate the challenge in understanding some of this, and in all of our episodes and our nutrition nuggets, we talk about and we try to make sense of the data and the research that's available. And we also are all very clear that there really isn't money in researching a lot of these things in the same way that there is money in researching a pharmaceutical. So to figure out or build a study that really, like, there are ways to have these multifactorial studies, but they're complicated and
they're very long term. And
Right.
that presents a huge challenge. And actually, I don't know, we don't necessarily need to go down that road yet, but I did make some notes about RFK, and his administration kept claiming he wants more randomized controlled trials. So RCTs are the gold standard of scientific methods.
Mhm.
They're really expensive, whether you're doing them on nutrition or drugs or anything. They're just really, they're they're the most expensive probably, if not the second. And, we can't, just saying that we needed more and like we weren't doing them before is also frustrating.
Right, exactly.
Yes, we were doing them. They're very difficult to do in the nutrition field. And we were doing some,
And for what it's worth, the way they have halted studies that were already in progress and are attempting to revamp the way things are studied has sort of exacerbated even what was already in process and helpful information.
Right.
So let's go through the language that accompanies the diagram. But I will say, I could already tell you before I even did any research, I could tell which industries were behind this pyramid, right? I looked at that and I was like, oh, it's so obvious who paid for this. And then as we read into the guidelines, we see it even clearer. And then I suppose to their credit of transparency, you can see exactly who was involved in this committee and exactly what industries have paid them. And of course, I was correct, right? So, all right, let's go
again.
Yeah.
That was one of the things that was pointed at, that the Dietary Guideline Advisory Committee had been working the past 5 years and they produced the scientific report that came out last fall. And those are what usually then finalize and guide the actual pretty picture in the end, like the final dietary guideline document for the next 5 years. And that's the one that, was mainly, 50% or so was rejected. Some was partially rejected by RFK's HHS, but there was so much backlash about some of the funding for those scientists. And now it's happening again. To me, that's the frustration. And that is going to happen in the science world. You need funding for, that doesn't always mean that they're twisting the truth. Not at all. But it is, when it's so one-sided,
right?
Then it's like, can we proceed with caution, with a little bit of caution. Right. So anyway.
All right. I want to break it down. Let's pause here to highlight our partner, and then we're going to go through each category, what the guideline, what the recommendations are, and then, we can share our thoughts on it. Sound good?
Sound great.
Okay, perfect. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by wellness advice, you're not alone. And this episode is certainly speaking to increased confusion, because everywhere you look, someone has a rule, a system, or a must-do. And when none of it sticks, it's easy to turn that frustration inward. So here's the truth. You're not broken. You've been given broken tools. I wrote Uncomplicating Wellness, Ditch the Rules, Quiet the Noise, Reclaim Your Life, to help you step out of the chaos and start trusting yourself again. This isn't about doing everything perfectly. It's about understanding what actually matters and just letting the rest go. If you're craving clarity, relief, and a more humane approach to health, this book is for you. Find Uncomplicating Wellness wherever books are sold, or text the word book, BOOK, to 833-801-0500 to learn more. Again, that's text the word book, BOOK, to 833-801-0500. Okay, so let's just go through the recommendations for each category. And I think that can help us, make some sense of what's here. So at the top, they talk about eating the right amount for you. Now, all of you who listen and are longtime listeners of this podcast, I'm very particular about the words we use. I don't like right, wrong, good, bad, all of those things. You can go back. We have an episode called Going Against the Textbook. So I obviously have a problem with the way they phrase this. And I think the challenge is eat the right amount for you puts the onus back on the individual. I think this is their attempt at nuance and individualization. The challenge is people don't know what that is. And the point of these guidelines, in my opinion, is to help us figure that out. And so I don't know that they're necessarily doing that. They also talk about hydration being important. So I respect those things. And I think there's ways that we could communicate it better.
Yeah, I agree. That seems to be a theme throughout that. And we can talk about that in a bit. The removal of the health equity lens that the other, team of scientists had really led with. Definitely.
Yeah, let's come back to that because I pulled something from their in-depth document that's like 500 pages long on that. So we can
Yeah, no, that's good.
That.
Because it's like when you can't generalize and tailor at the same time. And this is kind of, their attempt to do that. So
exactly. On the protein front, I appreciate the emphasis of protein. I appreciate the emphasis of whole food protein. I am frustrated that the diagram doesn't offer more of the plant protein sources. Like in the words part, they talk about legumes and lentils and beans and peas and stuff like that. But the picture very much emphasizes red meat, poultry, seafood. And again, the part that's frustrating to me is that there is zero conversation in the protein category about the quality of it.
Yeah.
And that's the big driver between whether a red meat is going to support our health and our health outcomes or make it even increasingly challenging to meet some of the fat guidelines that they didn't adjust given the amount of meat that they're recommending.
Yeah. I mean, I had to sit down and do the math. Like I was like, okay, what? Now, I am not anti increasing the protein. However, I will,
Me either.
As a disclaimer, and there's research coming out, but the other joint committees that like through the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering and Medicine with a joint committee with Canada, they set the dietary recommendations and intakes and allowances and things. Research is like underway and ongoing about potentially increasing, but that hasn't been put out yet. And this is like a quarter and then a double. It's a big jump.
So now their recommendation is 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. And I will tell you, in some of the work that I do, and depending on what someone's lifestyle is, this is still a little low for what we're seeing supports long-term health, longevity, maintaining muscle mass, the active lifestyles that a lot of people, it's different now than it once was in caveman times. So like there was a lot of progress in this, I think, but also to your point, this is supposed to reflect a consensus, and there still is not consensus here.
Yeah, not consensus. And the problem, again, it's a wording thing. There was never a war, quote unquote, on protein.
Right.
There are more products with add your protein to this, that, the other.
Than ever. Like you can't escape it unless you have, very little access to certain foods, which is a different issue. Also, more than half of Americans, I think it's about 60 as well, from the other dietary guidelines, they have those statistics available, are already getting more protein than the 0.8. So when you look at the 0.8, I'm not saying that they don't need more, but most Americans were already, those that reported and were being surveyed for following, not following guidelines in the past, because they kept bringing up how the past had no importance or value. But the majority of Americans were getting a significant amount more protein than the 0.8. Yes. So when you accuse the 0.8 as a minimum recommendation, which says that is what it is, it's not saying that's all you should have. That's the starting point for survival and health, right? Then most people are okay. They're getting more than that. I'm not saying that there aren't certain, like I'm agreeing with you in the sense that there's, more active lifestyles. If you're aging and you want to prevent like atrophy and things like that, there's so many, if you are, have had cancer and are in recovery, like there's so many different conditions that could, again, going to that nuance,
nuance. But to act like nobody was getting enough protein before is an outright lie.
Right.
Most people were getting more than the recommended
Right.
amounts.
It sensationalized the language around it in a way that I just wouldn't have put that in this category. Like there are other things I think that maybe deserve that kind of attention. But for what it's worth, right? So then when we look at the people who were on the committee, and they show in one of these documents, we'll link to it in the episode notes, they show in one of these documents who was on that committee and where they received income. And it is very clear that they received money from the cattle related lobbyist
National
groups.
Beef Association and Texas Beef Council, National Pork Board. Yeah.
And so it's very clear in the diagram that and the same thing with the dairy industry. So the next guideline they talk about is consume dairy. And I appreciate also they talk about gut health. They talk about fermented foods. They talk about, the microbiome, which to me is progress and that being part of the conversation that's happening here. But with that said, we are the only species that eat the milk of another animal. We would be fine if we did not eat dairy. And technically, after about age 7, our bodies don't produce an enzyme that helps us break down lactose. So, fine.
Well, and a lot of people are allergic to it.
Right.
My little nephew is deathly allergic to dairy. And he's not, I think way back, pioneer times, he might not have made it because formula wasn't around,
right.
Like in those early, like a dairy-free formula, soy-based formula wasn't around to like keep him alive to the point where he could then eat other foods. Like a meat and a bean and a, and a grain, whatever it is. But that being said, I agree, like you can definitely survive without it. And I also think there are a lot of this, excludes a lot of, there are certain ethnicities that are more prone to certain allergies or an inability to digest it too. So it's like you're setting people up to not follow the guidelines, even though it's like that's unnecessary.
And
it's
to
so
recommend
inflexible.
And to recommend 3 servings per day of dairy is so, to me, guided by the money rather than what we know to be true about biology.
Right. Yeah. It's not that if you love dairy and that's a big source of like your protein and, then great. Like some people, they're not going to cook meat. Like I am not a vegetarian, but I definitely don't eat meat every day. I don't like to cook it that much. I will say it's like, I don't have a grill. I live in a tiny apartment. Like there are just certain things that it's like, I get it maybe when I go out to eat and get, but I just don't cook meat a lot. So yogurt is a great option for me. Right. But I don't think I could eat 3 servings of it a day. That's a lot of yogurt, Well,
and at that point, it's falling into your protein category.
Yeah.
And then to me, when you compare those serving sizes, or not serving sizes, but the serving recommendations to what they're recommending for vegetables, this is where I get really frustrated. So, okay, I love an emphasis on vegetables.
Yes.
I love that they are talking about the importance of nutrient-dense vegetables. And in the wording, they talk about a variety of colorful, great, awesome. Their recommendation is 3 vegetables and 2 fruits per day. So you're telling me I'm supposed to eat as many vegetables as I have dairy? No, sir.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like
that was my frustration.
That can be your frustration. No, we already struggle so much with encouraging a good amount of veggies and fruits, like in the diet, in the American or Westernized diet. It is so challenging to work them in. So why not boost them as much as you can instead of like saying, oh, you're good with 3. Like, first of all, and this is not a rant. This is where all of this, it's not arbitrary. That's a very strong word but serving size is probably, and understanding that is, I'm sure you work with your clients and your community members with it. And I do as well. The fact that people don't really know what serving sizes are all the time either. Stuff comes in different containers. Stuff gets piled into a bowl. That's different than a plate. We don't live where we're not 8 and we're not eating out of divider plates like we used to, like when we were 5,
Right.
like serving sizes are so confusing. So to say, put a number like 3, which is very low, it's just not as helpful,
And
I would say.
to say, for perspective, we want people to be getting a minimum of 25 grams of fiber per day, mostly from vegetables and sometimes
Most
fruit.
people don't get it.
A, most people don't get it. And B, you're not going to get at 3 servings of vegetables a day. You won't.
Right.
So for perspective,
especially if you're also reducing grains, whole grains, which I know they encourage whole grains. They say only eat whole grains, which is great. But that's also, if you're thinking that that's less important, again, you're just like running out of things that'll give you fiber.
right. And so like we generally recommend 8 to 12 servings of vegetables a day. And a serving is a handful, unless it's greens, it's 2 handfuls. So when we think about the volume of food, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, like, and I do think part of their challenge in their servings per day is because it still has this overarching cap of a 2,000 calorie diet. And let's just be clear, it's the quality of the calories that make a difference. And if our calories are coming from the vegetables versus the dairy or the steak or the refined carbohydrates or soda or the ultra processed foods or whatever it is, like it's not the same. And so I sort of wish there was more conversation around that. I wish that their recommendation for vegetables was higher. At least fruits and vegetables are higher on the list than, Then they talk about incorporating healthy fats. So they do talk about omega-3 rich seafood, nuts, seeds, olives, avocados. They bring up dairy again here and the full fat dairy for this. I just want to be clear. Full fat dairy is not giving you omega-3s. If it is because they supplemented those cows. But if cows are eating grass, they're not, I appreciate that a full fat dairy is less processed than a reduced fat or fat-free dairy. But I also think those are individual choices and we have to choose where our sources of fat are coming from and kind of balance that intake to decide, when we feel our best and,
Yeah. Like for instance, I'll just use myself as an example. Again, I do eat meat, just not every day. It's not always my source of protein. I have milk. I put it in my coffee, but I put a generous amount in because I am a little caffeine sensitive, but I still love coffee. So I use 2% milk just because I don't need it to be whole milk. I think that 2% has like enough flavor. It's not like skim milk, as my grandpa called it, blue milk. He thought it like looked blue because there's no,
blue. He's not wrong.
So like I get that, right? I'm like, oh, I'm not having a ton of saturated fat because I'm not eating any meat sources tonight. I'm making chickpeas tonight. Like I'm eating something else, right? So I'll have it. And I know also I am vitamin D deficient, especially in the wintertime. Most Northerners especially are. If you live in a northern area, no sun, right? For months, sadly. And vitamin D is a fat soluble vitamin. So it means that usually it's a little bit more easily absorbed when eaten with fat, like when either in a fatty meal, it's consumed at the same time, your body, it's just more bioavailable. Your body likes to absorb it that way. So I know for myself that works for me and I'm not as worried about it counting towards, am I really getting high in my saturated fat for the day? Because that could be concerning, or for the week, whatever. But that's personal to me. Some people really don't like milk, animal milk. Like they don't like the taste of it. It's like, you're not going to force somebody to eat that when they can get vitamin D from other things. They can get protein from other things. They can get calcium from other things, right? The lack of like flexibility there.
And to your point on the calcium, I wish they had talked about the nutrients that come from milk and where we can also get those in our vegetables, but we only recommended 3 vegetables. And so we need it from somewhere.
Exactly. Yeah.
So then I guess the other thing we'd be remiss, because one of the big topics of conversation is that they're still recommending 10% of the total caloric intake, be the max amount from fat. And that's where you end up in this puzzle of the animal-based products with the saturated fat. And it's saturated fat, by the way, not total fat, but saturated fat max at 10%. And so that's where you're in this little bit of a puzzle. So we do see that we still must prioritize leaner animal protein, that we need the quality fats. And again, I think the quality of those animal protein sources is what makes a major difference in that saturated fat consumption, because we see it different in animals that were fed corn or chicken feed or whatever than cows that eat actual grass. It's just different. You can see it when you look at a steak,
Yeah.
So then they talk about whole grains, prioritize fiber-rich whole grains, minimizing, they say significantly reduce the consumption of highly processed refined carbohydrates.
Which again, for a communication standpoint, not helpful to a reader, no. Not even helpful to like an educator. That does not give me clear, quantifiable guidelines like 10% of my calories should come from saturated fat. That is clear. That is a clear number that then I can estimate and calculate a ballpark, right?
Well, and then there are examples. Yeah. So it says such as white bread, ready to eat or packaged breakfast options, flour tortillas, and crackers. Like that is the weirdest hand-picked list that I don't think was casually chosen.
Yeah. Or maybe it was because this was all very rushed, Jen. Maybe
maybe I'm giving them too much
Jen is giving them too much credit on this one. There are literal mistakes in this too. And again, sometimes we don't proofread our work. I make grammar mistakes all the time. But there's like the 3 food labels in one of the documents has like a literal big, mass boo. Right. So like maybe they did just say throw some grains on there to make a point.
Right. And they say 2 to 4 servings per day of whole grains. And again, if we actually understood what were whole grains versus not, that would be helpful. And also, we could certainly, it's not quite in the same category as the dairy, but humans would be fine if they didn't have grains. Like, there really aren't I'm thinking as I say this out loud, like I'm trying to think of even the micronutrients that are most abundant in grains. Because of the way our grains are grown, they're all fortified to put the nutrients back in. So like, I don't even think there are nutrients coming from grains that you couldn't get somewhere else.
I think my counter to that is that the reality and the realistic nature of that does not exist. So while we could, does it apply to a generic, like folic?
Yes, I'm with you.
Folic acid in the tortillas, the fortification. Fortification literally saves lives when it comes to
1,000%.
So then you have that and you're like, well, what we've created a food system, society, civilization.
And I will say, like, fundamentally, I might agree with a lot of what's here.
Yeah.
My frustration is that it is taken completely in isolation from the reality of our food system.
Correct. Yeah.
And then when you go to WIC and SNAP and school programs, where they're the ones who are now forced to reconcile these two pieces.
Yeah, that's even more.
It's near impossible.
But it's also like near impossible for just a normal average Joe and the family to make these clear, to avoid processed food, to avoid all added sugar before a child is 10, all added sugar. That is a recommendation.
Right.
Wow. Nobody's going to come to that little kid's birthday party. I'm sorry. It's just wild that like, it's so isolating in what like you said, I just think it's totally out of the reality that we and the way that we live, the ways that we get food in our food supply, the places that we can purchase food or even grow our own food, but just all of it is so far removed that it's very hard to, as like a nutrition professional, healthcare professional, educator, anything, working with people, you're taught to approach with a sense of empathy and understanding of like where you meet them where they're at. And so they're not meeting anybody where they're at.
No. And so I'm going to skip to this part because I pulled this from their document because I was like beside myself over it. The bottom line is they basically say part of this is about health equity. And then in the same sentence, they say, the same paragraph, they say, and we are removing the emphasis on health equity because that's what previous administrations talked about, and that's not what this is about.
And instead of looking at it from an approach of like, let's all work together collectively to try to improve the health of an entire country's population, instead they say that is not how you look at science. You look at it and you do, your version, like individualized. It's on you. We're telling you what you should do, and now it's on you, which is absolutely not how, again, not to make it political, but you cannot address health in this country and talk about health outcomes and positive longevity and all of these things without looking at all of the circumstances and factors that influence and impact an individual's journey and life and their, all of the environmental things and their access to healthcare. Like it just, unfortunately, you cannot isolate it. We love to like break nutrition down into, we start big and then we go, oh, let's find all the foods that have like all the vitamin A in it and say, yes, like, carrots are a really good source of vitamin A, right? So we go really micro. And then what you have to do is have to expand back out and go really macro again and say, okay, but that vitamin A, it doesn't mean anything if this person is dealing with this, or if we're not caring about what their ethnic background is, their genetics, how they grew up, their trauma, their stress, the hospitals that are closing in their rural neighborhood. Like it's you just can't. So that's my rant.
I get it.
It's not going to make America healthy again. You can't use a slogan that generalizes an entire country's people and then pretend like you don't care about the influences that impact over half of them.
Yes.
You just can't. And you can't do that.
And it's interesting because like when in the sections where they talk about processed foods and added sugars and all these things, I do think they do a fair job of calling out some of the words for sugar and some of the ways to identify these additives.
Yeah, I appreciated that list. Yeah.
And yet it wasn't comprehensive in a way, like it was certainly went further than before. I think it was better than not having it there. And
well, it's putting a lot of faith in people really understanding a food label and whether then they look at how much they should have of something. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. Like being healthy is not easy.
Exactly. And
it's a challenge.
For better or worse, I don't know how much these new guidelines are helping the average person do it.
Right. It's not as accessible, I think, as it should be. So, again, we never told people to eat a bunch of ultra processed foods, like we as health scientists. That never was like
the bottom line.
We didn't go, go 60% of your plate can be ultra processed. That was never a thing. We always wanted people to eat quote unquote real food.
And then the reality, though, is that when you take, and this is, I think, my overarching frustration. And when I ask the question, okay, like new dietary guidelines, new food pyramid, now what?
Mm-hmm.
My frustration is that even when we appreciate pieces of what's there, and if a person were to really follow this, they could move the needle. The reality of what that takes, the budget that it would take, the removal of industry lobbying and awards and rewards to the food companies that currently make up a majority of somebody's shopping cart. It's, in my mind, the right hand not talking to the left.
Yeah. Well, and, again, you can put this information out there and hope that people are like, oh, okay, I like the new rebrand and I'm going to take health into my own hands and get it all right this time, right? But there are also things like, I don't know, on looking back at like Center for Science in the Public Interest, again, a really good, transparent organization that, points fingers in a good way. Like, is the government going to now address the issue of like all of our agriculture subsidies that really support corn and soy?
Exactly.
And make money off of that?
Exactly.
Is, RFK going to call out not just removing the red dye from Skittles, but removing all the added sugar from Skittles? Because like there was a lot of hand clapping and win on that side for taking a dye out of a food that should already be consumed in moderation. So are you going to hold all of those huge food industries accountable?
Exactly.
We are a capitalist nation and their existence is intended to sell.
Yes. So, and here's the other thing, and I know a lot of the people personally who were involved in a lot of the efforts that got some of these food dyes removed and a lot of that stuff. And I love that there was progress made.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And
It's not bad.
if we were to sit here and go after each additive individually, we don't have that kind of time when it comes to human health.
Right.
What it took to get one thing removed, it is a mountain far too high for us to climb, to think that that is how we're going to change the food industry.
Or the health outcomes of an entire nation. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, which is how they're approaching it.
And listen, my entire career is based on helping people get their desired health outcomes. And I am also a capitalist, right? I worked in hedge funds. I get it. To me, it's the incentive structure that has to change. Like, I did a whole rant on this on somebody else's podcast about what is actually needed. And, we need to adjust the incentive structure. We need to change, instead of it being the stick, we need the carrot, because it is so difficult to enforce non-compliance with food labeling guidelines and all these other pieces. Like, there's a lot that we can learn from other countries. There's a lot that we can do. And while these guidelines are super helpful, it's also pretending like that's the only thing we can do, I feel like. I'm not saying that they're saying that, but that's what it feels like.
Yeah. Again, I'm not making it political in that way. I'm just stating reality.
100%.
That is the goal of the food industry, is to sell.
It is an industry.
It's an industry. So it is not in their best interest necessarily to make all of their foods have no added sugar.
Right.
We wish, but that's not the reality. So again, that's where the disconnect and the bubble that we were talking about, like the little isolation, is there can't be this here's 5 documents that are a transformed food pyramid.
Right.
Great. Not all of it's bad. I think there's a lot there that stayed. There's some things that are not so consumer friendly, not so helpful, not clear, not as clear, in a topic like nutrition that's already very nuanced. Clarity helps, and there's a lot of conflicting things. But bottom line, if it doesn't also then apply to other things that maybe it could be fighting the fight on a bigger scale in our food system as well.
Yes.
It might help, like you said, a few people that take these, love them, have access to everything. They can change, and adapt and adopt them and, move the needle in a healthier way and feel great about it. That number of people is going to be very small.
Yeah.
Again, that's just a prediction, of course, but I just think it's going to be really challenging to see this change, all of the health outcomes. Other things are not also changed.
Agreed. And I think that's a good place for us to kind of put a pin in it. But I think for people listening, I hope that a takeaway is to say, if you are in the position, review the guidelines with both curiosity and a critical eye, implement or experiment with what may serve you, and feel free to leave what doesn't. Because if you
eat
are
more veggies.
Yes, exactly.
And always eat more veggies.
Always eat more veggies.
That's going to be yeah. No, I agree. Yeah. I mean, like anything in nutrition, it's going to be individual. If you're training for a marathon, you might need to eat more than 2 servings of carbs. I am going to say that. You know what I mean? But if you're not, and you're a cancer survivor, you might need to eat really good quality proteins. There's just, so I'd say take it with a grain of salt, in the sense that you have to, just like anything in health, find what works for you, but, and reach out to people and, experts that you trust to clarify some things that might not be helpful.
And hopefully this, important too. Hopefully our time together offered that, at least to some degree, and then you can continue to reach out. All right, friends. On Friday, and this week's bite-sized bonus episode, we're talking about CCC. So this is a framework that we can use when we're working towards something and that old stuff shows up, right? It's that old thought pattern or an old habit. And I learned this from one of my colleagues. It struck me, so I'm sharing it with you on Friday. And this week's bite-sized bonus episode, be sure wherever you're listening, click the plus sign or the follow button, and then your app will alert you when the Nutrition Nugget goes live. Well, as always, everybody, I'm your host, Jenn Trepeck. Connect with me on Instagram or all social media. I'm at Jenn Trepeck, N-N-Trepeck. Website is asaladwithasideofries.com. Pick your platform, send a message because I love hearing from you. Julie, thanks again for joining me this week.
Oh my goodness, it was my pleasure. It's so good to see you. So good to hear you. All
too.
the things.
Always. And of course, friends, if you are not already a member, I invite you to join us in the Happy Healthy Hub. You'll go to asaladwithasideofries.com/membership. This shows your support for this podcast, this community, but above all, your help. On top of the 24/7 Ask Me Anything, community chat, discounts, and curated content, you'll get this week's recipe for spaghetti squash carbonara. And it's your last chance to claim 10% off my next group coaching cohort. So until next week, remember, if your plan is working for you, keep going. You do not need to change course because the government published a document. You do not need to fall victim to a new year and new dietary confusion. Well, friends, that's it for today's episode of Salad with a Side of Fries. Congratulations for making yourself and your health a priority. Thanks so much for joining us. Be sure to click subscribe or follow on your favorite podcast platform. Share us with a friend, and we'll be back next week. Always remember, you deserve it, and you are worth it. Happy healthy.